Las Piedras, New Mexico, high noon in late July. Under a sky so blue it hurts the eyes, young construction worker Diego Alejandro Vargas swings his pickaxe into the baked earth one final time. That IT strikes not dirt, but something hollow, ceramic, buried for generations. That he kneels, brushes away the dust, and uncovers a small statue of the Virgin Mary, wrapped in rotting cloth, her face serene as if she has been waiting for him all along. That night, the abandoned chapel above begins to breathe with the scent of roses, and a spring of water bubbles up from nowhere, turning a forgotten desert town into a place where miracles happen every single day and no one can explain why. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Diego Alejandro Vargas was the kind of young man who blended into the sun-baked horizon of Las Piedras like another shadow under the cottonwoods. He 23, he had hands cracked and darkened from years of hauling rebar, nailing 2x4s, and wiping sweat with the same faded bandana. His abuelo had left him before crossing back to Mexico for the last time. The town itself was one of those places the interstate forgot, a cluster of adobe trailers and cinder block houses where the Rio Grande whispered secrets to the mesquite, and time moved slower than the freight trains rumbling past at dawn. Diego lived in a sagging double-wide with his abuela Rosalia, who still rose before the sun to knead masa for tortillas that filled the air with the smell of corn and sage. Evenings found them on the porch, her whispering rosary beads while he stared at the sandstone hills turning purple in the twilight, content with a life that asked little and gave just enough. Most folks knew Diego as the quiet one who fixed roofs after hailstorms and never charged the widows more than cost. He had stayed when his high school friends fled for Albuquerque or the oil fields up north, because Las Piedras held something for him that cities never could. Silence wide enough to think, stars bright enough to dream under, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing every crack in the road by heart. Abuela Rosalia, 84 and bent like the old juniper in the yard, kept a framed image of the Virgin of Guadalupe on the dresser, its edges worn from decades of gentle touches. She prayed every evening without fail, lips moving silently, face glowing with a faith Diego respected but never quite understood. That he believed in hard work, in the feel of a hammer in his hand, in the satisfaction of a wall standing straight at the end of the day. God, if he existed, was out there in the vastness, too big for statues or beads. That Monday morning the heat arrived early, wrapping around the job site like a blanket soaked in fire. Diego had taken the contract to dig foundations for a prefab home on the edge of town, where old cottonwoods leaned weary over forgotten land that locals whispered had once held a mission chapel torn down in the 30s after a fire no one could explain. BY11. The air shimmered. Flies hid in the shade of half-built walls while the other workers slouched with lukewarm Gatorade, trading stories about weekend fishing trips. Diego kept digging alone at the far end, pickaxe rising and falling in steady rhythm, shirt clinging wet to his back. Then the strike landed wrong. Not the sharp ring of metal on stone, but a dull, hollow thud that vibrated up his arms like knocking on buried wood. That he stopped, knelt, brushed gloved hands across the soil. That IT crumbled easy now, almost eager. Beneath the surface something pale curved into view. Too smooth for rock, too fragile for pipe. His fingers traced it carefully, a shape wrapped in rotting cloth that dissolved at his touch, revealing a face serene and sorrowful, eyes closed in eternal prayer, lips curved in the faintest smile. That IT was a statue, no taller than his forearm, carved from something between clay and old plaster, her mantle chipped but blue, hands folded over a heart that seemed to beat beneath the dust. Diego sat back on his heels, breath caught in his throat. He had uncovered saints before. Little roadside shrines were common in these parts. But this felt different, heavier, like pulling a secret from the earth that had been waiting specifically for him. He didn't call the others. He wrapped her gently in his bandana, tucked her under his arm, and walked off the site early without clocking out. The foreman would dock his pay. But Diego didn't care. That evening, when he placed the bundle on the kitchen table and unwrapped it for Abuela Rosalia, she froze mid-stir at the stove. Her wooden spoon clattered to the floor. She reached out, trembling, and touched the statue's face with fingertips worn smooth by 80 years of work and prayer. "She's not from here," Rosalia whispered, voice thick with something between awe and recognition. "Not like any virgin I've ever known." That night the air in the trailer shifted. The stale heat carried a faint hint of frankincense. Though no incense burned, the candle on the dresser, sputtered out during dinner, relit itself while they slept. Diego woke gasping from a dream so vivid it felt more real than the trailer walls. A chapel hole and glowing under silver light. A pool of clear water bubbling at its feet. Cottonwoods bending reverence. And a voice that wasn't quite a voice whispering, "The time has begun." 3 nights in a row Diego woke gasping, sheets twisted around his legs, heart hammering like he had run miles across the mesa. Each time the same dream. The ruined chapel on the hill, no longer broken but luminous, roof whole, stained glass blazing with colors that had no name. And at the heart of it the little statue floating above a spring of water, so clear it mirrored the stars. Cottonwoods bowed low as if in worship, and the same gentle voice that was not quite a voice drifted through the night air. "Bring her home." Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. He told no one, not even Abuela Rosalia, who watched him over breakfast with eyes that saw more than she ever said. On the 4th morning he rose before the roosters, wrapped the statue again in clean white cloth, the same cloth his abuela had used for baptisms and burials, tucked her gently under his arm, and walked the 3 miles to the abandoned chapel locals called Santa Inés de los Cerros, St. Agnes of the Hills. No one had prayed there since the Great Fire of 1937, when lightning struck the bell tower and the roof collapsed inward like a broken heart. What remained was a shell, splintered vigas blackened by smoke, adobe walls crumbling back into the earth they came from, stained glass shards glittering in the dust like tears the desert never cried. Diego stepped through the doorway that hung crooked on rusted hinges and felt the air change. It was not cooler, but thicker, warmer, as if the chapel had been holding its breath for 90 years and finally exhaled. Light poured through the broken rose window in the east wall, scattering ruby and sapphire across the floor where pews had once stood. At the far end, beneath what was left of the altar, he found the niche, a hollow carved into the adobe, smoke-blackened but perfectly shaped, as though the wall itself had been waiting for something to fill the emptiness that he did not speak. He simply unwrapped the statue, placed her inside the hollow, and surrounded her with a circle of smooth river stones he gathered from the dry arroyo behind the chapel. Then he knelt, not because he knew how to pray, he didn't, but because his knees gave out under the weight of something too large for words. In that moment, from the back left corner where the floorboards had rotted away, a soft trickle began. Water, clear and cold, welled up through the cracked earth with no pipe, no spring, no reason at all. It smelled of wet cedar after rain, of high mountain snowmelt, of places the desert had forgotten existed. Diego watched it spread across the ancient tiles, reflecting the broken ceiling like a mirror turned toward heaven. He stayed until the sun climbed high enough to burn the back of his neck. When he finally stood, legs numb, he felt lighter, as though the chapel had taken something heavy from him and replaced it with something even heavier. Responsibility, maybe, or love. That evening he returned with a broom made from creosote branches, a bucket, and a stubbornness that surprised even him. He swept decades of dust into the wind, pulled ivy from the walls until his hands bled, scrubbed the floor until the water ran clear instead of brown. He worked by the light of a single lantern, the trickle growing into a shallow pool that reflected the flame like liquid starlight. He did not do it for pay, for glory, or even for understanding. He did it the way a man builds a cradle before the child is born, because something inside him already knew the child was coming. Word traveled slowly at first. Old Dona Esperanza, who walked with a mesquite cane and had not left her house in months, saw him carrying the broom past her window and followed out of curiosity more than faith. She stood in the doorway, eyes wide at the scent of roses that suddenly filled the ruined nave, though no flowers grew within 50 miles. She did not kneel, her knees would not bend, but she stayed an hour, then two, then came back the next day with a tiny beeswax candle she lit at the foot of the niche. Others followed. A truck driver who had lost his son to the war, a teenage mother whose baby would not stop crying, the widow who still set an extra plate at dinner for a husband gone 20 years. They came alone, then in pairs, then in quiet procession. No one announced it. No one posted signs. They simply arrived, drawn by a pull stronger than doubt, and found the chapel already sweeping itself clean in their hearts. By the end of the week, the niche held not only the statue, but a small mountain of humble gifts. A child's crayon drawing, a soldier's dog tags, a lock of baby hair tied with blue ribbon, handwritten letters folded so many times they felt like stones. The water kept rising, never flooding, only filling the shallow basin someone had lined with more river stones until it became a perfect mirror reflecting the Virgin's sorrowful, peaceful face. And every night Diego locked nothing. He left the door open to the desert wind, because some homes are meant for whoever needs shelter, and the chapel had remembered how to pray long before any of them arrived. By the third week of August, the chapel had become a heartbeat the entire town could feel. People no longer spoke of going to see the statue. They simply said, "I'm going up the hill," the way you say, "I'm going to breathe." Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. The gravel road that once ended in tumbleweeds was now lined with parked pickups, lowriders, and even a few out-of-state plates from Colorado and Arizona. Inside, the air stayed impossibly cool, scented with roses and wet stone, though the desert outside baked at 110. The little pool had grown into a shallow well no deeper than a man's ankle, yet its water never evaporated, never muddied, never ran dry. Pilgrims filled plastic bottles, dipped handkerchiefs, touched fingertips to eyelids and lips. Some wept without knowing why. Others laughed the way people laugh when a weight they carried for decades suddenly lifts. Diego no longer worked construction. The foreman had let him go, not in anger, but in awe, because every morning Diego was already at the chapel before the sun, sweeping, filling oil lamps, carrying elderly women over the threshold when their legs gave out. He slept on a cot in the sacristy that still smelled of old incense and mouse nests. His hands, once rough from rebar and nails, now carried the soft shine of candle wax and river water. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. Marisol Reyes, 6 years old, born with legs that never learned to walk, was carried in by her mother Luz, a waitress at the truck stop diner who had not smiled in years. Luz had heard the stories but believed none of them until the pain of another surgery bill and another empty promise from doctors became too loud to ignore. She laid her daughter on a folded serape near the well, kissed her forehead, and whispered the first Hail Mary she had prayed since childhood. The chapel was fuller than usual that day. A reporter from Albuquerque named Valeria Castro had arrived with a camera and the polite skepticism of city newsrooms. She stood near the back, recorder running, notebook open, ready to capture quotes about mass suggestion or placebo effect. Little Marisol stared up at the statue with huge dark eyes and asked in the clear voice only children possess, "Senora, will you help me stand up today?" Silence fell so complete the trickle of water sounded like thunder. Luz began to cry. Valeria's pen stopped moving. Marisol reached out both small hands toward the niche. Then, slowly, impossibly, her legs unfolded beneath her. She pushed up on trembling arms, knees straightening for the first time in her life, and stood, bare feet on cool stone, wobbling like a colt taking its first steps. But standing, the chapel exploded, not with screams, but with the sound of hundreds of people hitting their knees at once. Luz lunged forward, wrapping her daughter in arms that shook too hard to hold. Valeria's recorder clattered to the floor. Through tears she would never explain on air, the reporter watched a single tear, clear, perfect, unmistakable, slide from the right eye of the little clay virgin, trace the curve of her cheek, and fall onto the exact spot where Marisol's feet had touched the stone. Diego saw it too. He was the only one close enough, the only one who had spent every dawn staring at that sorrowful face. He knew every crack, every chip of paint. He knew she had never wept before. Word spread faster than wildfire in Dry Chamisa. By nightfall, the video Valeria posted, shaking hands, voice cracking, had millions of views. Hashtag Virgin del Desierto and hashtag Lananaquaseparo trended across the Spanish-speaking world. Television vans arrived with satellite dishes. The bishop's office in Albuquerque issued a cautious statement about ongoing discernment. Scientists asked to test the water and were gently turned away, but the people kept coming. They came in wheelchairs and on crutches. They came with cancers eating their bones and grief eating their hearts. They came with rosaries made of knotted string and photographs of prisoners who could not come themselves. And the little virgin kept weeping, not every day, not on command, only when a heart broke open wide enough for heaven to step inside. Diego never claimed to understand. When reporters shoved microphones in his face asking, "How did you know?" he only shrugged and said, "I didn't. She did." And every night, after the last pilgrim left and the candles burned low, he knelt alone by the well and listened to the water sing the same quiet song it had sung since the day he brought her home. Faith is not what you understand. It is what you carry. September rolled in on cooler winds, carrying the scent of pinyon smoke and the first yellow leaves of cottonwood. The chapel was no longer a ruin. It breathed. Candles never ran out, though no one could say who kept buying them. The little well stayed exactly the same depth, yet thousands filled bottles, and it never diminished. Roses, real ones now, appeared fresh every dawn at the Virgin's feet, crimson and thornless, though the nearest rosebush grew 40 miles away in someone's irrigated yard. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. The bishop had appointed a commission. Scientists from the university took samples and left scratching their heads. The water contained trace minerals found only in glacial melt thousands of miles north, yet the chapel sat on solid caliche that had never seen ice. The tears, when collected on sterile cotton, evaporated without residue, leaving only the faint scent of Damascus roses. No one published papers. Some truths refused to be reduced to footnotes. Then, on a Tuesday when the sky hung low and gray with the promise of the first real rain in 7 years, an old blue pickup rattled up the gravel road and stopped crooked beside the chapel door. Out stepped Padre Julian Morales, 78 years old, collar faded, limp pronounced from the hip. He shattered falling off an altar 30 years ago while trying to fix Christmas lights for children who never came back to Massachusetts. He had retired to a trailer in Truth or Consequences, told everyone he was done with parishes, done with people, done with God who had, in his words, stopped answering the phone. He had heard about Las Piedras the way old priests hear everything. Whispers in the confessional, phone calls from widows, a postcard with a single line. Padre, you need to see this before you die. He came with no suitcase, only a small leather satchel containing a stole, a worn chalice, and the bitterness of half a century. Diego met him at the threshold. Padre Julian, he said, voice cracking with recognition. This was the priest who had baptized him, who had buried his parents, who had disappeared after one too many empty pews. I thought you were dead, the old man finished, half smile crooked. Sometimes I thought so too. They stood in silence while pilgrims flowed around them like water around stones. Julian's eyes took in everything. The swept floor, the mountain of offerings, the little virgin watching from her niche with that sorrowful tenderness that made strong men weak. He inhaled once, roses, candle wax, desert rain coming, and something inside him cracked. That night, he did not sleep in the sacristy with Diego. He walked alone into the chapel after the last pilgrim left, closed the creaking door, and sat in the front pew like a penitent. The candles had burned low, painting gold across his lined face. He opened his satchel, drew out the purple stole he had not worn in 8 years, kissed it the way his mother taught him, and placed it around his neck. Then he wept, not the quiet tears of old men remembering youth, but the raw, ragged sobs of a shepherd who had abandoned his sheep and finally found them waiting for him without accusation. He wept for every funeral he rushed, every confession he cut short, every Christmas Eve he spent drunk because no one showed up. He wept until the stole was soaked and the floor beneath him wet again, this time with salt instead of grace. The Virgin wept with him. 2 perfect tears slid down her clay cheeks and fell into the well, sending ripples that caught every candle flame and scattered them like stars across the surface. Don Diego found him asleep against the altar rail, head on folded arms, face peaceful for the first time in decades. The priest woke, looked up at the statue, and whispered the first honest words he had spoken to God in years. I'm sorry I stopped believing you still walked among us. That morning, without announcement or permission, Padre Julian celebrated Massachusetts. No vestments beyond the stole, no servers, no microphone. Just bread he had bought at the gas station and wine from a jug in his truck. 50 people crowded in. 500 stood outside under the cottonwoods. When he raised the host, rough, uneven, consecrated on a makeshift altar of river stones, the rain finally came, soft and warm, drumming on the patched tin roof someone had fixed overnight. No one inside got wet. No one outside seemed to notice they were soaked. After communion, the old priest spoke only once, voice hoarse but steady. I have preached in cathedrals of marble and trailers of tin. I have never felt the real presence like I feel it here, in this broken place, among broken people, with a broken priest. This is not a shrine yet. It is a hospital, and she is the nurse who never clocks out. He sat down. No one clapped. They simply stayed on their knees while the rain sang on the roof, and the little Virgin smiled through her tears. The first Sunday of Advent arrived wrapped in frost and starlight. Long before dawn, the road to Santa Ynez de los Cerros was already alive with headlights winding up the hill like a procession of slow-moving stars. People had come from Chihuahua and Chicago, from prison visiting rooms and cancer wards, carrying nothing but hope folded small enough to fit in a pocket. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time is it there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, We witnessed the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Diego rose in the dark, washed his face in the tin basin on the porch, and put on the same clean shirt he had worn the day he first dug her from the earth. In his calloused hand, he carried the one thing he had kept all these months, the rough gray stone with the faint cross-shaped crack, the very first stone his pickaxe had struck the morning everything began. He had carried it in his pocket every day since, a reminder that miracles sometimes arrive disguised as ordinary obstacles. Inside the chapel, the air was already warm with breath and candlelight. The pews, salvaged, mismatched, carried in by farmers and welders, were full, but no one jostled or complained. Children sat on grandparents' laps. A soldier in desert camouflage stood at attention in the back, eyes wet. An old woman from Oaxaca hummed a lullaby under her breath while her daughter translated the words for a curious reporter who had finally put away her notebook. There was no choir, no organ, no bulletin. Only the soft rustle of coats, the creak of wood older than the state itself, and the quiet trickle of water that had never stopped singing. Diego walked slowly down the center aisle, past faces he now knew by heart, and knelt before the niche. The little virgin looked exactly as she had the day he found her, dusty, chipped, sorrowful, infinitely tender. But now her feet rested on a mountain of ordinary offerings that had become extraordinary. Photographs of missing sons, wedding rings from widows, baby shoes never walked in, medals from soldiers who came home in boxes, letters sealed with tears instead of wax, and roses, always fresh roses, whose petals never browned. He placed the cracked stone at the very center, kissed it once, and stood. Then he turned to the crowded room and spoke for the first time as though the chapel itself had given him a voice. "I'm not a priest," he began, voice low but carrying to the farthest corner. "I'm not wise or holy or anything special. I dig foundations for a living, or I used to. I found this statue buried under dirt like she was waiting for someone stupid enough to listen. Since that day, I haven't seen angels or heard heavenly choirs. But I've watched broken people walk in here, carrying more pain than their bodies could hold, and walk out lighter. I've seen children born without hope learn to laugh again. I've seen old men who forgot how to pray remember the words their mothers taught them." He paused, throat working. "If you came looking for proof, I don't have any. If you came looking for answers, I don't have those either. But if you came looking for a place where your heart can rest for a little while, you're already home." A small girl in a red coat, no more than 7, braids tied with yarn, walked forward carrying a candle covered in glitter and stickers. She looked up at Diego, then at the Virgin, and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Can I leave this for her?" Diego knelt so they were eye to eye and nodded. She placed it carefully beside the cracked stone and lit it with hands that didn't shake. One by one, others followed. A farmer with a handful of dried chamisa flowers, a teenage boy with a guitar pick, a mother with a tiny hospital bracelet still smelling of newborn skin. By noon, the makeshift altar had become a living mosaic of human longing turned into love. That night, Diego did not lock the doors. He never would again. He stayed behind after the last pilgrim left, sweeping candle wax, straightening benches, refilling the oil lamps that somehow never ran dry. When midnight came, he sat alone in the back pew and listened to the wind moving through broken stained glass like a distant organ, to the water singing its ancient lullaby, to a soldier whispering forgiveness into the dark, to a child humming her grandmother to sleep. At the stroke of 12, he walked once more to the niche. Candlelight danced across the Virgin's face, and in her folded hands rested a single white lily no one had seen anyone place there. Its scent filled the chapel like forgiveness made fragrance. Diego smiled, the slow, quiet smile of a man who finally understands he was never the keeper of the miracle, only the doorman. This place was never his to explain or defend. It belonged to the widow and the orphan, the doubter and the believer, the prisoner writing from a cell in Florence, The mother whose son overdosed in Albuquerque. The child who simply needed somewhere safe to light a glitter candle, not a chapel born from dust. A statue once buried. A young man who learned that faith is not a feeling you chase, but a home you open for others. And somewhere in the New Mexico night, beneath a sky wide enough for every broken heart, the Virgin of the Dust kept watch with tears that never stopped falling and a love that never stopped rising. Write the word dust in the comments if this story reminded you that even what the world buries, God can raise into something beautiful. Let's see how many hearts tonight are breathing in the same quiet miracle. May Our Lady of the Dust wrap you, your family, and every place you feel forgotten under her gentle, tear-stained mantle tonight and always.